It was a picture-perfect family, or so everyone believed. A loving husband, a devoted wife, and a daughter stepping into adulthood. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where doors remained unlocked, where neighbors exchanged warm greetings, where nothing ever seemed out of place. To outsiders, they were the embodiment of stability. A father who worked tirelessly to provide, a wife who stood by his side, and a daughter who had her entire future ahead of her. But within the walls of their home, something was happening that no one could have ever imagined. It started with whispers, soft conversations behind closed doors, a sudden shift in the way they looked at each other, an unspoken tension that lingered in the air long after they left the room. A husband began to notice the change in his wife. The way she smiled differently. The way she seemed distant even when sitting right next to him. The way his daughter's demeanor changed whenever his wife was near. At first, it was easy to dismiss. People grow apart. Teenagers act out. Marriage has its challenges. But what he didn't realize was that his entire world was about to be shattered. There were secrets hidden beneath the surface, secrets so unimaginable that when they finally came to light, they would end in bloodshed. This is the story of a man who had no idea that the two people he loved the most were hiding something that would ultimately cost him his life. A story of betrayal that unfolded in ways no one could have foreseen. How does a family go from love and trust, to deceit and murder? Tonight, we unravel the events that led to a husband's final moments. The signs that were overlooked. The warnings that went unheeded. And the shocking truth that left an entire community in disbelief. Because this wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was something far more destructive. And once the truth was exposed, there was no turning back. Fayetteville, Arkansas. April 2015. The morning sun had barely risen when a frantic 911 call shattered the silence. The voice on the other end trembled, panicked, gasping between words. "My husband, he's not breathing. There's blood. Oh my God, there's so much blood." When first responders arrived at the two-story brick home in an affluent Fayetteville neighborhood, they found the front door slightly ajar. Inside, the house was eerily still, save for the faint hum of a television left on overnight. There were no signs of forced entry. No broken glass. No ransacked drawers. But upstairs, in the master bedroom, the scene told a different story. Lying on the floor next to the bed was Johnny Ray Baxter, a 45-year-old real estate agent known for his sharp business acumen and unwavering work ethic. He was a man who had built a life through persistence, who had turned struggling properties into thriving investments, who was respected among his peers. He was also a devoted father, stepfather, and husband. Yet now, he was unrecognizable. His face was swollen beyond recognition, his skull fractured from multiple blunt force blows. Blood spattered the walls and pooled beneath him, seeping into the plush beige carpet. The murder weapon, a heavy brass candlestick, lay discarded nearby, its intricate engravings now obscured by crimson smears. Standing just a few feet away, wrapped in a silk robe, was Darling Baxter, his 38-year-old wife. Her hair was disheveled, her face streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue, barely able to meet the eyes of the officers who asked what had happened. In the corner of the room, standing in the shadows, was Lily Adams, Johnny's 19-year-old stepdaughter. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She simply stared at her stepfather's lifeless body, her expression unreadable. The officers exchanged glances. Something felt off. The crime scene was brutal, personal, suggesting an act of rage rather than a random break-in. And yet, there were no defensive wounds on Johnny's hands. No overturned furniture. No clear signs that he had fought back. As investigators began their work, the question loomed, who would want Johnny Ray Baxter dead? And the answer, they would soon discover, was far more disturbing than they could have ever imagined. To the outside world, the Baxters were the embodiment of success. Johnny and Darling had been married for nearly a decade, raising Lily together in a life of comfort. Their home was immaculate, marble countertops, custom furnishings, the smell of lavender always lingering in the air. Johnny had provided everything his wife and stepdaughter could ever want. Lavish vacations. Designer clothes. A future without financial worries. But money couldn't mask what was happening behind closed doors. Darling had once been the ideal housewife, poised, affectionate, always doting on Johnny in public. But in the months leading up to his murder, neighbors noticed a change. She seemed distant. Distracted. There were whispers that she had grown tired of Johnny's long work hours, that she resented playing the role of the supportive wife. And then there was Lily. A bright, ambitious college student, Lily had always admired Johnny. He had been more than just a stepfather, he had been a mentor, a provider, a stabilizing force in her life. But something had shifted. Her relationship with her mother had grown tense. Arguments erupted over trivial things, curfews, grades, responsibilities. Friends recalled that Lily had started withdrawing, skipping class, spending more time at home. And yet, when she and her mother were together, there was something almost intimate about their interactions. Something unspoken. Something unsettling. Nobody could have predicted what would come next. But as detectives sifted through the evidence, piecing together the final days of Johnny Ray Baxter's life, one truth became painfully clear. This was no random crime. This was premeditated. And the two women standing in that bedroom, the grieving wife and the silent stepdaughter, weren't just witnesses. They were the ones who held the answers. As detectives combed through the Baxter household, searching for answers, it became clear that Johnny Ray's death wasn't the result of a random act of violence. It was personal. The sheer brutality of the crime scene, the force of the blows, the overkill, suggested deep-seated rage, not a calculated robbery gone wrong. But Johnny had no known enemies. No debts. No history of violence. So why did someone want him dead? The answer, investigators would soon learn, was hidden in the tangled relationships within the walls of his own home. At first glance, Lily Adams was the picture of an ordinary college freshman. A promising student with an eye for photography, she had always been described as quiet, introspective, mature beyond her years. She had been just 10 years old when her mother, Darling, married Johnny, and by all accounts, she had taken well to having a stepfather. Johnny, in turn, had been an unwavering presence in her life. He paid for her schooling, encouraged her ambitions, and protected her in ways that her biological father never had. He was the man she trusted most. But somewhere along the way, that trust shifted into something else. At first, it was subtle. Late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. A lingering glance across the dinner table. A closeness that felt too intimate to be purely paternal. According to texts recovered from Lily's phone, the turning point had come just 6 months before Johnny's death. On an otherwise ordinary evening, Darling had gone to bed early, leaving Johnny and Lily alone in the living room. What began as an innocent discussion about her coursework turned into something that neither of them could walk away from. From that moment on, their interactions changed. Secret meetings. Clandestine touches. A relationship that defied every boundary of morality. And yet, Johnny never intended to leave his wife. For him, it was an affair, nothing more. For Lily, it was something deeper. But there was one person who saw through the carefully constructed lies, Darling. A wife's suspicion turns to obsession. Darling Baxter was not a woman who tolerated betrayal. A former pageant queen, she had always been accustomed to admiration, to being the center of Johnny's world. She had married him for his wealth, his status, and his unwavering devotion. So when she noticed a shift, when she saw the way Johnny looked at Lily, the way Lily lit up in his presence, her suspicions were ignited. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia. Until she found the text messages. thousands of them. Late-night exchanges. Declarations of love. Explicit messages that left no room for misinterpretation. Johnny and Lily had been careful, but not careful enough. According to forensic data, Darling had discovered the affair just 2 weeks before Johnny's murder. What followed was a series of explosive arguments, overheard by neighbors. One witness reported hearing shouting late into the night. Another recalled seeing Darling leaving the house in a rage, her face pale with fury. Darling had been pushed aside for someone younger. Someone she had given birth to. And she wasn't going to let that stand. When detectives questioned Darling and Lily separately, inconsistencies emerged almost immediately. Darling sobbed through her interview, claiming she had been asleep when she heard a thud upstairs. She had rushed into the room only to find Johnny on the floor, barely breathing. Lily's version was eerily similar, almost rehearsed. But then, detectives spoke to the neighbors. A man across the street had heard screaming around 1:30 a.m., an argument between two women. Another neighbor had seen Lily and Darling leaving the house together just before sunrise, before the 911 call was made. The evidence was stacking up, and investigators had a feeling they were being lied to. Still, neither woman cracked. Not yet. But there was one final clue that would change everything. The diary that revealed everything. During a routine search of Lily's bedroom, detectives found something they hadn't expected. A diary, hidden beneath her mattress. The entries were obsessive. Conflicted. Pages filled with guilt, passion, and anger. March 15, 2015, I love him, but he will never leave her. I know that now. He thinks I'll just let him go, but I won't. He belongs to me. April 2, 2015, she knows. I can feel it. She watches me like a hawk. She doesn't deserve him. I do. April 11, 2015, I told her. I told her everything. She didn't cry. She just stared at me. Then she smiled and said, let's make this right. 2 days later, Johnny Ray Baxter was dead. And now, detectives knew exactly who to look at. Because Johnny hadn't just been murdered. He had been executed. And the two women who stood in that bedroom the night he died, his wife and his stepdaughter, had planned it together. Detectives had spent weeks untangling the web of secrets that surrounded Johnny Ray Baxter's murder. The affair between Johnny and Lily was damning, but it wasn't enough. Lust alone didn't explain the sheer brutality of the crime, the rage behind every blow. Someone wanted Johnny dead, and they wanted him to suffer. Then came the discovery that changed the course of the entire investigation. Forensic specialists had already retrieved thousands of text messages between Johnny and Lily. But as they dug deeper, they uncovered something far more chilling. On a messaging app that Johnny rarely used, investigators found a conversation thread that had been deleted, but not before being backed up to the cloud. The sender, Johnny. The recipient, Lily. The message, it's over. It should have never happened. Don't call me again. Sent just 3 days before his murder. The words were cold, final. Johnny was done. Lily had given herself to him, her trust, her love. And now, he was casting her aside, retreating into the safety of his marriage. The very next message, recovered from Lily's phone, was to someone else. Darling Baxter. Mom, we need to talk. You were right. A day later, Johnny was dead. Had Johnny's rejection pushed Lily over the edge? Or had she turned to her mother for comfort, only for Darling to see an opportunity for revenge? The betrayal ran deep, but who had struck the fatal blow? When the news of the affair reached Johnny's close friends and relatives, the response was immediate: disbelief, disgust, and devastation. His brother, Michael Baxter, sat in a police interrogation room, his hands trembling as he read over the transcripts of Johnny's final messages. This isn't him. This isn't my brother. His voice cracked. He loved his family. He would never do this. His sister, Maria, collapsed into tears when detectives confirmed the truth. Johnny's affair with his stepdaughter wasn't just a scandal, it was a wound that cut through the heart of the entire family. But for Johnny's mother, Margaret Baxter, grief turned to fury. She was convinced that Darling had known all along. That she had waited for the perfect moment to strike. "That woman is poison," she spat into the cameras of local news stations. "She used him. She used them both. And now my son is dead." Margaret's words weren't just an accusation. They pointed detectives toward something they hadn't considered before. Up until this point, Lily had been the prime suspect. She had every reason to want Johnny gone. He had taken what he wanted from her, then tossed her aside. Her diary entries revealed obsession. Her texts hinted at rage. But then came a detail, one that changed everything. The murder weapon, a heavy brass lamp from Johnny's own bedside table, was wiped clean. No fingerprints. No DNA. Too clean. The body showed signs of multiple blows to the head, suggesting a prolonged, emotional attack. But Lily was only 5 feet 3 inches and barely 110 pounds. The angle of the wound suggested force, more than Lily could have inflicted on her own. Had she acted alone? Or had someone else stepped in to finish the job? Then, detectives found something else. In the trunk of Darling Baxter's car, buried beneath a pile of old clothes and gym bags, was a plastic bag containing a pair of gloves and a blood-stained nightgown. DNA testing confirmed what they feared. The blood belonged to Johnny. And the nightgown? It belonged to Darling. It was the moment that shattered every assumption detectives had made. Johnny's murder wasn't the result of a scorned stepdaughter's heartbreak. It was a calculated act of revenge. And the woman who had orchestrated it, the woman who had pulled Lily into a tangled web of manipulation and destruction, was his wife. Darling Baxter hadn't just discovered the affair. She had weaponized it. She had turned Lily into her accomplice. And together, mother and daughter had sealed Johnny Ray Baxter's fate. For weeks, the town of Fayetteville, Arkansas, had been gripped by the horrifying details of Johnny Ray Baxter's murder. The scandal of the affair, the brutal nature of the crime, and the shocking revelation of who was behind it had shattered the image of a seemingly ordinary family. But as investigators pieced together the final moments of Johnny's life, one question remained: would Darling Baxter and Lily Adams face justice? On a cool morning in May 2015, police descended upon the Baxter home. Darling Baxter was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of coffee when officers burst through the door. She didn't scream, didn't fight. Instead, she set her mug down carefully on the counter and turned to them with an eerie calm. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she muttered. Across town, Lily Adams was pulled from her college dormitory in handcuffs. She was sobbing before officers even reached the squad car. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she whispered through her tears. The weight of their crime had finally caught up to them. The trial began in the summer of 2016. The prosecution painted a picture of a manipulative and vengeful woman who had discovered her husband's affair and plotted his murder with precision. They presented forensic evidence linking Darling to the scene. The blood-stained nightgown found in her car. Text messages and call logs between her and Lily, proving that she had knowledge of the affair before Johnny's murder. But Darling's defense was cunning. Her lawyers argued that Lily had acted alone. Darling took the stand in her own defense, tearfully portraying herself as a heartbroken wife who had no idea that her daughter was capable of such violence. She described the moment she found out about the affair. The betrayal. The humiliation. The pain. But she swore she had never planned to kill Johnny. The defense leaned into Lily's instability. They brought forward diary entries in which Lily had obsessively written about Johnny, expressing her deep love for him, but also growing paranoia that he was using her. One entry read, "He says he loves me, but he won't leave her. He says I'm special, but I feel like I'm nothing. He thinks I won't do anything about it. He's wrong." The jury was forced to consider an alternative possibility. Had Lily, in a fit of rage, killed Johnny herself? And had Darling simply helped cover it up afterward? Darling's composed demeanor on the stand had its intended effect. Despite the overwhelming evidence, she was convicted of second-degree murder, rather than first-degree murder. Her sentence, 40 years in prison. It was a victory for the prosecution, but a lesser punishment than many had expected. The real bombshell, however, came with Lily's case. Unlike her mother, Lily never went to trial. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder, avoiding a lengthy trial in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her confession, however, revealed the darkest twist in the entire case. Lily hadn't planned the murder. Her mother had. According to Lily, the moment she confided in Darling about the affair, everything changed. Darling wasn't horrified or furious, she was coldly calculating. She told Lily that Johnny had been using her. That he would throw her away and never look back. And then, she proposed a solution. He doesn't get to destroy us. He doesn't get to win. In Lily's version of events, it was Darling who had struck the first blow. It was Darling who had wiped down the crime scene. It was Darling who had convinced her daughter to go along with it. Lily's confession stripped away any lingering doubt. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a carefully constructed act of revenge. Lily was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Her life, her future, everything had been taken from her by the one person who was supposed to protect her. Her mother. Even with the trial concluded, some questions still haunted those who followed the case. Had Lily been a willing participant, or a pawn in her mother's twisted scheme? Did Darling truly love her daughter, or had she manipulated her into carrying out her revenge? Was there more to Johnny's rejection of Lily than anyone knew? To this day, Darling has never admitted to being the mastermind. She sits in a maximum security prison in Arkansas, still insisting that Lily acted alone. Lily, now in her 30s, has cut off all contact with her mother. She refuses to speak her name. Fayetteville was never the same after Johnny's murder. Neighbors who once greeted each other warmly began locking their doors at night. Friends who once admired the Baxter family struggled to comprehend the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. Johnny's brother, Michael Baxter, became a fierce advocate for domestic abuse victims, giving speeches about recognizing manipulation and toxic relationships. Johnny's mother, Margaret, refused to forgive Darling. She visited her son's grave every week, leaving Fr.